right, I'd be happy to. So let's start off with ticket quotas in the state of California. It's actually in the vehicle code, California Vehicle Code 41600. So for your viewers and listeners, 41600, look it up. 41602 and 41603. 41600 defines, it's actually an arrest quota. So we always just say a ticket quota, but it's actually arrests. And it defines an arrest quota as any requirement concerning the number of arrests or citations or the proportion of your arrests or citations compared to anyone else. So let's think about that, right? Any requirement, and as we were talking at lunch, any requirement is more. Write me more tickets than you did yesterday, and you can bang out early. That's a requirement. They just specified. Any requirement could be just write the little old ladies' tickets because we know they're the worst drivers. That's any requirement. And you can see how the legislature wanted it to be so broad because it includes arrests. Could you imagine if you said just go out and arrest X, Y, or Z? That's all we're concerned about? And you picked a race or an ethnicity or a gender or a sexual orientation? That's why it's so broad. So it's any requirement. And something I see all the time is comparisons. At the end of evaluations, there's often these little recap charts, and it says what you were, and then it has like the watch average or the unit average. That comparison is a ticket quota, okay? Okay, so that's step one. Step two, 41602, says that no agency that employs police officers can have any policy regarding ticket quotas. So let's put those together. Any policy regarding any requirement of the number of citations or the proportion of citations you write. That, if there is such a policy, violates the ticket quota law. That's a problem. And I've spoken to CHP officers. I just finished a trial I'll tell you about against Riverside PD with a $2.85 million verdict on behalf of a Riverside motor officer. I represented a dozen LAPD motors, a handful of Whittier. They weren't motors, they were motors and patrol officers. And nobody knows this except the officers, right? The guys who are writing the tickets, they're out doing it. They often like, wait a second, that doesn't sound right. And they look it up. You know, in the age of the Google machine, it's not that tough. You just look it up. Yeah. And with the people I spoke to, and this probably makes sense, is there's uniform pushback. That's not right. That's not a quota. We didn't give you a set number. Well, that's not what the vehicle code says. The vehicle code says any requirement, right? Like the basic speed law is it has to be a safe speed for all the attendant circumstances where you are. Depends on what the circumstances are. Is it raining? Is it dark? Is it light, right? So it's broad. It's any requirement. So now here's a question I also get. All right, well, what happens if my department, my sergeant, my supervisor, lieutenant, captain says, okay, I want you to go out and write, 15 tickets a day. That's a quota. If nothing happens to you, that doesn't mean there wasn't a quota. It just means that maybe you do or you don't have a whistleblower lawsuit, okay? So the next step, right? So we have the vehicle code, 41600, 41602. Any requirement, can't have any policy, which let's take a quick footnote. You guys train. You guys have been through post. You guys have been through advanced post. You guys have been on the job. I know that you're retired, but departments have unwritten policy, custom, and practice, right? As we were talking about on the way over here, we were going through a hypothetical. Well, what happens? Your hypothetical was, what if you pull somebody over who's very nice, very compliant, identifies himself as having a concealed weapon permit and being armed? And you were asking me, and we were talking about, would it be okay to politely ask if you could hold the weapon? Well, there's unlikely any written policy in your department about that. But let's say you went back and you talked to your sergeant and he thought, hey, that's a great question. And up the chain, she or he went and they came back down and said, okay, here's what we're going to do. Well, that would be an unwritten policy, right? There's unwritten policies and procedures in every police department. It's just you can't write everything down. Well, when you're doing firm grip, how do you do it? Where do you position yourself? How much is firm grip? Well, when do you use body weight? There's general parameters in post, right? And there's going to be general parameters at your given agency, but there's a lot of unwritten policies that you learn from your FTOs. Okay, so police officers out there, ticket writers, don't be swayed because the statute says policy, because now you have to apply the law to the real facts, and that is there's written and unwritten policies. And I got all the command staff in the Riverside PD trial. Of course they admitted that. You can't not admit that. So then it becomes, well, what if there's no punishment? Well, then that would be a conversation, let's say you called me, what we would have about whether you have a lawsuit that's worth pursuing. So let's examine the last piece. Under the Labor Code, 1102.5, it's the whistleblower statute, right? There's two ways to be a whistleblower. So, Mark, you could, before you were retired, something could come out in roll call and you could stand up and say, I don't think we're allowed to serve search warrants like that. My recollection of the knock and announce, I don't know what the law is on knock and announce anymore, but back in law school we read those constitutional cases on knock and announce. I think we have to knock 3 times and wait 10 seconds. And your captain says, shut up and sit down. You're now a whistleblower.